I'm Bryan Elliott, host of the show Behind the Brand, and it's my pleasure to go live again with you. I was just live the other day with the Sharks from Shark Tank. I am a regular contributor, and I produce that web series that you probably all love called Behind the Brand. Today I'm here with a super special guest, author of the book Persuadable: How Great Leaders Change Their Minds to Change the World, Mr. Al Pittampalli. Al? You are now live in front of the Entrepreneur Magazine Facebook group.
Good evening.
Let's do it. How's that?
Thank you. It really is an absolute pleasure to be here. So here's the scene. So King Claudius is in a cold, dark room. He's kneeling in prayer. His eyes are closed. From the corner slips quietly into the room Hamlet. Hamlet is carrying with him a dagger. Now, before you know it, Hamlet is standing right behind King Claudius with the dagger hovering above the king's head, ready to avenge his father's death. Now, at this point in the play, Hamlet is pretty certain that it was his uncle, Claudius, who had killed his poor father by pouring poison into his ear while he was napping. Not only that, but this guy has the gall to marry Hamlet's now widowed mother and claim the throne for himself. Now, I'm a pacifist, okay? I'm not advocating violence, but if anyone deserves it, it's this son of a bitch. And so there's Hamlet standing there, ready to do this, take this action that he knows is right, and he knows is just, and he has a thought. What if I kill Claudius now? Because he's in prayer, this kind of heavenly noble act, I unwittingly send him to heaven. Then Hamlet has another thought. What if my father, who didn't have a chance to go to heaven because he was killed while he was sleeping, could see this? He would be spinning in his grave. And then he has another thought. What if I waited until Claudius is doing something wrong, something sinful, and kill him then? Then I would send him straight to the underworld. At this point, Hamlet is caught in the web of his own thoughts. In fact, so caught up, he ends up leaving the room and leaving a golden opportunity to get his revenge. Now, it's not till months and months later that he ends up getting his revenge. But in the process, many innocent people die, including Hamlet himself. So literary theorists look at the play Hamlet, and they talk a lot about this idea of a tragic flaw. So the tragic flaw is a personality trait of a protagonist that leads to his or her downfall. Now, in this play, the tragic flaw is obvious. It's indecision, right? Hamlet's inability to make a decision. But isn't that the tragic flaw of all human beings? I know it's mine, isn't it yours? I mean, how many times have you had a decision that you've overthought, that you've overanalyzed, that you didn't even know how to approach? Right? By show of hands, how many people here are actively procrastinating a decision right now? Okay, about half of you. That's interesting because I've always thought there are two kinds of people in this world. There are those who procrastinate decisions, and there are liars. But we all do it, right? We all procrastinate decisions. But what if we had a little bit of clarity? What if we had a little bit of clarity that helps us cut through the anxiety and approach the decision with some power? That's what I want to talk to you about today. So my name is Al Pittampalli, as Bryan mentioned. I'm the author of two books. The first book is called Read This Before Our Next Meeting, and the latest is called Persuadable. And these are books on leadership, but really they're about decision making. Because leadership is really just a fancy word for people who make decisions and have those decisions affect other people. That's really what leadership is at its heart. And what I've done now for the last decade is study leaders, okay? Study some of the best leaders in the world, in business, some in politics, and in the nonprofit sector as well, to really understand why is it that some leaders have a better time making decisions. Like I said, every leader that I've ever met procrastinates And they always have to deal with this uncomfortable uncertainty that comes with decision making. But some people just have a little bit of an easier time. They seem to be able to do it with more power. And what I've realized over the years, especially in this last book, is that what these leaders have in common is a rule. It's a rule that they follow that doesn't help them necessarily know what the right decision is, but it helps them to understand how to make the decision. I call this the decision maker's creed. And what I'd like to do for you today is to share with you this decision maker's creed, because I think it will help you make an impact, an immediate impact in your business and your life, but you gotta keep an open mind, okay? Because before I jump into the solution here and tell you the decision maker's creed, I gotta start with the problem. And in order to start with the problem, we gotta address this idea of this anxiety, okay? The same anxiety that you felt for a moment when I asked if you're actively procrastinating a decision, I want you to bring up right now. Now, I know it's not comfortable, right? Because we don't like to think about that anxiety. In fact, oftentimes we're actively avoiding it, we're denying it. But anxiety would have never survived hundreds of thousands of years of evolution if it didn't have a lesson to teach us, if it wasn't a teacher. So what I want to do right now is I want to use anxiety as a teacher to help us to understand how to make decisions, okay? So if we were to look at anxiety for a second, we would realize that it is comprised of at least two distinct but related feelings, okay? It feels like just one terrible feeling, but there's at least two feelings, okay? The first one is a kind of jarring feeling. It's like this feeling of internal panic, okay? And I'm going to argue that behind that feeling is a concern for accuracy. So everybody who faces a decision understands one simple thing, that if you are to make the right decision, there will be some kind of positive outcome, right? There will be some kind of pleasure, some reward, some kind of payoff. And if you make the wrong decision, there will be a negative outcome. There will be some kind of pain, some kind of punishment, some kind of negative consequences. So my metaphor here is the ticking time bomb scenario, right? It's in like every movie ever, very common movie trope. And what is it? The protagonist is standing in front of a bomb that threatens to explode, threatens to devastate the entire city. And conveniently, there are three wires protruding. They're all multicolored. One is red, one is yellow, one is green. And clip the right wire, you turn off the bomb, you're a hero. Clip the wrong wire, and the entire city is in ruins, right? And if you notice, the protagonist's hand is always shaking, right? It's always shaking on the way to the wire. Why? Because of that feeling that I was just talking about, this arresting feeling. And what's driving it is a concern for accuracy. They know that if they don't get the decision right, there will be consequences. But it's not the only feeling. Decision-making anxiety, there's also another feeling. And it's not this kind of sudden feeling, it's more of a enduring, nagging dread that accompanies the decision. And I'm going to argue that what's behind that anxiety is a concern for speed. So it's not only okay that we make a timely decision, or an accurate decision rather, we got to make a timely decision. So my metaphor here is traffic, which you guys living in California, I'm sure you know nothing about it. So if you've ever been in a traffic jam, it's an infuriating process, very frustrating, right? I want you to imagine that for a second. You're in traffic and there's cars as far as the eye can see and they're moving at a snail's pace, right? Sometimes not even moving at all. And here's what happens. 45 minutes later, you finally get to the source of the traffic, and what do you see? It's infuriating, right? One car, one stalled car, one disabled vehicle on the freeway caused all that traffic, right? Thousands of cars to be delayed. You know, thousands of cars to be delayed for a meeting, or for a family reunion, or for a wedding, or for a Celine Dion concert that you were in line for to get tickets for. You know, I'm still upset about the Celine Dion concert. But the point is that it's this delay that occurs just from one measly car. I want to argue that stalled decisions are the traffic jams of our lives. That when we fail to make a decision on time, there are thousands of decisions that fail to occur because of it. Decisions are linked to action. And when we fail to make a decision on time, the action doesn't happen, right? The longer it takes you to decide whether or not you want to quit your job, the longer it takes you to find a new job, right? The longer it takes you to hire that new employee for your business, the longer it takes you to onboard that employee, the longer it takes you to get them trained and get them up and running, and the longer it takes them to contribute value to your company. And as much as we often rationalize, and we rationalize that, well, I'll just make that decision tomorrow, or I'll make that decision in a week or in a month, we know deep down and an intuitive in our bones that timeliness is really important when it comes to decision making. And that's what drives part of the anxiety. So there's this concern for speed and there's this concern for accuracy. But here's the most difficult part. The concern for speed and the concern for accuracy are in direct opposition to each other. They're in conflict. So think about it. When you're thinking about a concern for accuracy, what's the impulse? It's to spend more time, right? It's the old adage, look before you leap. You don't have to be a decision-making expert, somebody who studied the literature, to understand that if we spend more time to consider the consequences, to weigh the alternatives, to consult other people, which is the gold standard for making a better decision, then you will achieve more accuracy. I think the more accuracy you get, the less speed. Trade-offs are actually not that difficult to understand, but human beings, it's very hard for them to accept. And let me give you an example of this. So the other day I was at McDonald's. Don't judge me. And somebody walks in. He doesn't walk in, he marches in like a bat out of hell. Okay, this guy who's carrying this McDonald's bag, it's a white McDonald's bag, and you can tell he's just really angry, and he gets to the cashier, and he slams the bag down on the table. And there's like a French fry explosion, right? French fries are getting all over the place. And he said, I want to speak to your manager. This poor manager comes out, visibly shaken, and says, can I help you, sir? And the man says, yes, you can help me. I was here 35 minutes ago, and I specifically asked for ranch dressing. I got home, I got all the way home, I opened up my bag, and what do you think I saw? Honey mustard dressing. I cannot eat this food with honey mustard dressing. I need ranch dressing. Now, at this point, everybody in the store is looking at this man like, whoa, he is not angry, this man is hangry right now. And so the manager had no other choice, and she's terrified. She just, reaches down underneath the table and grabs like 10 ranch dressings, puts them on the table, on the desk, and the man, puts up his chin, he snatches all the ranch dressings and gets out as quickly as he came in. Now I'm looking at this fool and thinking to myself, this guy clearly doesn't understand the speed accuracy trade-off. Clearly. It is literally called fast food. Okay? Think about that for a second. When you go into a McDonald's or any fast food joint, you are entering into this implicit contract, whether you realize it or not. They're going to give you the food in an ungodly brief amount of time, and you are giving up a little bit of a chance for error, right? You're basically accepting that. If you really wanted perfect accuracy, you should have gotten slow food. But this guy, this moron, didn't understand the speed accuracy trade-off. I really couldn't believe my eyes. All right, fine, you got me. That was a story about me. So this idea of trade-offs are very, very hard to accept. And I think my favorite example, which isn't the speed accuracy trade-off, but it's another trade-off, is New York City real estate. I don't think it's very much unlike maybe Orange County real estate, but all of my friends, people in New York City where I live, they always tell me, man, I got a great deal on this apartment. I got a great deal. You probably have friends in Orange County that tell you that. I got a great deal on this house. And I'm here to tell you, that at least in New York City, I haven't studied the Orange County market, there is no such thing as a good deal. New York City is the most competitive marketplace for real estate in the world. Nothing is undervalued or overvalued. It just costs whatever it's worth, right? And so one of my hobbies, people have hobbies, your hobby might be golf, your hobby might be knitting. My hobby is to go to my friends and disappoint them by pointing out to them why they did not get a good deal. And so, for example, one my friends will tell me they have, you got to see the place. It's got amazing, view and a great space, and I'll show them why it's not a great deal because it's 20 blocks away from the subway, right? Or another person will tell me that they have an amazing location, and I'll tell them why it's not a great deal because they don't have a doorman, right? And they got to wait for all their packages and stuff like that. But my favorite example, the one who almost got me, was one of my friends who told me, "No, Al, I know I listened to your thing on trade-offs. I'm telling you, I got a great deal." So I'm like, I got to go there and see this for myself. So I go to this, and immediately I'm like, he's sending me to this amazing location. So I'm like, this place has got to be a matchbox, right? So I go to his apartment, and it's not. This place is huge. And I'm like, wow, that surprised me. And I'm walking through the house, and everything is like perfect, and it's new fixtures, and beautiful hardwood floors. And I'm like, man, maybe I was wrong about the good deal thing in New York City. And then finally I walk into the kitchen, and I have to do like a double take. I mean, I couldn't believe what I saw. There's a shower in the middle of the kitchen. And he's like, so what do you think? Did I get a great deal? I said, no, you didn't get a great deal. You just have weird taste, right? Most people don't want showers in their kitchen, right? It's a trade-off. New York City apartments are all full of trade-offs. But there is something we can learn from my imbecilic shower-loving friend, which is that it turns out that's actually how you take advantage of a trade-off. See, it turns out that if you can identify something you can live with, that you can willing to sacrifice, that's how you beat the trade-off. If you're in Orange County and you don't have kids, everybody's searching for like the best schools, right? To find a house that's in a district with the best schools. If you're a young couple, and if you don't have kids and you don't plan to have kids, go search on Google for the worst school in Orange County, right? Why not? You're going to end up getting a great deal on location, size, and everything else. It doesn't matter to you, right? This is the way we beat a trade-off. If we can understand what we can live with, what we can sacrifice, we can end up actually getting the best of the trade-off. So the question is, back to decision-making for a second, how do we know what to live with, or what we can live without, when it comes to the speed-accuracy trade-off? Because that's the key to understanding how to make a good decision. You might have some ideas, but I need to introduce one more economic principle before I can tell you the answer. And that's called the Pareto's principle. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the Pareto's principle because it's informally called the 80-20 rule, right? Who here has heard of the 80-20 rule? Okay, great. So the idea with the 80-20 rule is simple, right? It's that 20%, in some situations, in certain circumstances, 20% of effects, or causes rather, lead to 80% of effects, okay? So what do I mean by that? So, if we were to evaluate your guys' businesses, right? The companies you work for or the businesses that you've started, what we would find often is not that all of your customers are contributing equally to your company. In fact, we would find often this very disproportional distribution where 20% of your customers, 1 out of 5 of your customers, are contributing 80% to your revenues. Same thing with crime. So it turns out that in a lot of locations, in a lot of localities, 20% of neighborhoods are housing 80% of crime. Now, if you're in a world where we have finite resources, right, where we have limited time, attention, money, energy, why would we spend our resources across the entire population? If we were smart, we would spend most of our resources on the 20% that is producing 80% of the results, right? If you're a business, why won't you spend a disproportionate amount of your time, your manpower, your energy on the 20% of your customers that are producing the most sales? If you're a police chief, why aren't you spending 80% of your police resources helping the communities that need it because they're riddled with crime? This is why Pareto's principle is such a useful metric or a useful tool for allocating resources. But I'm going to argue that Pareto's principle is located in our decisions as well. That in our decisions, 20% of the decisions that we're making are leading to about 80% of the results. Okay? So if we were to take all the decisions you've made in the past year, right, which would be a very long list, we wrote them all down, what you would find is that even though almost like so many of those decisions felt super important at the time, they were. With the benefit of hindsight, you would see that only 20% were really that consequential, really made a big difference in your life. So what we need to do then, what Pareto's principle tells us, is we need to spend a majority of our time on those decisions, right? Because those are the ones that are important. This leads us to the Decision Maker's Creed. And the Decision Maker's Creed tells us we should slow down for the major decisions and we should speed up for the minor. See, for the major decisions in our life, we need accuracy, right? These are hugely consequential decisions. We should strive as much as possible to make the best decision. And so we can sacrifice speed, right? Because these decisions are too important to worry about doing them quickly. But when it comes to all the other decisions, who the hell cares about accuracy, right? These are not so consequential decisions. A good enough decision is good enough. We should get those done as quickly as possible, right? So we can get the speed that's necessary to drive our relationships, to drive our lives, drives our careers forward. So this is the Decision Maker's Creed that I think can help you vastly improve the quality of your decisions and the speed of your decisions. So a couple years ago, Mark Zuckerberg is standing at a Q&A session, a public Q&A session for the Facebook community. And much like this, I'd imagine, and people are asking him questions. So people are asking him, very serious questions like, what is the future of Facebook look like in a digital age, right? Somebody was asking, what kind of acquisitions are you looking at over the next 6 months? And then this one wise guy stands up and he says, hey Zuck, why do you wear the same gray t-shirt every single day? Which is true, he wears the same gray t-shirt every day. And people laughed. I can't believe hecklers go to these things, by the way. People laughed and they expected Zuckerberg to give a kind of lighthearted response, but he did. He looked that guy with a stone-cold face and he said, I work hard to spend as little time as possible on all the small, trivial decisions in my life so I can spend a maximum amount of time on the decisions that matter for me and the Facebook community. Mic drop. Right? The Decision Maker's Creed. Slow down for the major decisions, speed up for the minor. Anyone here use David Allen's Getting Things Done productivity system? Okay, a couple smart people. So David Allen has developed this kind of cult following because he's got this system, which is a fairly complex system for managing kind of all the things you have to do in your life. And basically his idea is, when it comes to all of our to-do lists and tasks, there's a way to systematically process and plan these tasks so we can approach them very efficiently, right? So he has all these ways to kind of organize them in projects and et cetera, et cetera. But the only reason this productivity is so successful and works so well is because of one little rule that some people find life-changing. It's been pretty life-changing for me. And it's called the 2-minute rule, which is that he develops all these instructions for how to process these tasks, but he says, but if the task can be done in less than 2 minutes, just do it. Just do it right then and there. Don't wait, don't decide, just get it out of the way because it would take you more time to plan, to decide, to actually organize than it would just to do the damn thing itself. The Decision Maker's Creed. Slow down for the major decisions, speed up for the minor. Gore and Associates is one of the big advanced material manufacturers. They're the ones that do Gore-Tex. And they have like this kind of legendary culture. They've kind of been on the best places to work since I think 1998, almost every single year. And people always ask, people are very interested in studying the culture to figure out, like, what are they doing that kind of makes people so happy? And one of the things they do is during onboarding, Bill Gore, who's the president, has this idea, this concept that they drill into every single person there. It's called the waterline principle. So he basically tells people that, listen, if you're about to make a decision, okay, I want you to imagine that our company is a ship in water. And if you're about to make a decision, and that decision ultimately fails, and imagine that it blows a hole in the side of the ship. If the hole happens above the water line, well, it's a mistake. It's not good. Nobody wants holes in the ship. But the ship isn't going to sink. So don't worry about consulting a lot of people for this decision, because it won't be catastrophic even if you get it wrong. But if that failed decision leads to a hole in the bottom of the ship, right below the water line, boy, you better run and hide. You better have consulted lots of people and made sure that you're making the right decision. Because those are the kinds that are truly highly consequential. Those are the ones that mean hell if you get them wrong, and heaven if you get them right. The decision maker's creed: slow down for the major decisions, speed up for the minor. This simple thought process is something that successful organizations, individuals, and leaders do, either intuitively without even realizing it, or simply because they understand the trade-offs involved. So this is, decision maker's creed is something that I teach a lot of people, but there's always these traps. It sounds very simple, but once you actually start to apply it, you'll realize it's not that easy. Okay, something can be simple, but not that easy. And so what I want to do now is to give you the 3 traps that you will inevitably fall into as you try to implement this. The first trap is the categorization trap. So no matter how hard you try to discriminate the major decisions from the minor decisions, a vast majority of your decisions are going to feel like they're major, okay? Perfect example of this is weddings. Have you ever had the misfortune of having your friends or family get married? Yes, we have one. Not because you love them and you want them to get together, but the wedding planning, my God. These people are so stressed out, it makes you stressed out. And the reason why that is because planning a wedding requires lots of decisions, right? Lots and lots of decisions. And couples spend weeks on every single one of them, right? They stress out on every single one of them. But listen, there's not that many important decisions when it comes to a wedding, right? There's not that many major ones. There's the food, the alcohol, the venue, the alcohol, the entertainment, and I'm forgetting the last one, the alcohol. That's it, right? Those are the major decisions in a wedding. And so why are you spending so much time on the little tchotchkes that you put in the gift bags that people are just going to throw away when they get home anyway, right? I'm offending so many people who have planned weddings, by the way, which is kind of the point. But the point is that the decision maker's creed tells us that we need to make sure we discriminate between the small decisions and the major decisions. But in the moment, everything feels major. For that couple, everything feels important. So one of the things that you need to do to get over the categorization trap is you need to get distance. You need to step back. You need to pause. You need to take a breath in order to remove yourself from the decision you're currently embroiled in. Because when you're embroiled in a decision, right, like the decision that I had you think about in the beginning that you're procrastinating, you're going to feel like it's important even if it's not. And it might be, I don't know, but you won't really know unless you get some distance. So one of the things I do is every single day at 5 p.m., I have a call with my assistant. It's like 30 minutes, sometimes it goes 45 minutes, and we don't do any work during that call, okay? We don't do anything specific. It's my opportunity to disengage from the work so that we can do what that call is designed for, which is to prioritize, to figure out what are the major decisions, what are the minor decisions. Because that's the ball game, folks. I mean, I've spent so much time on minor decisions that in one little call, I've been able to just take it off my agenda because I realize it's not major. It is minor. And so you may not have an assistant, but you do have people that can help you clarify what is major and what is minor, that can help you get distance. Every writer needs an editor, and every decision maker needs an advisor to help them get distance. The second trap when it comes to decision making is the speed trap, right? So even after you have successfully figured out what's a minor decision and what's a major decision, right? And you're like, you know what? It's a minor decision. I am going to sacrifice accuracy because a good enough decision is good enough, and we're going to go for speed. Brilliant. I'm very proud of you, but you're going to fall into a trap, and that's the speed trap. So what will get in the way of you actually achieving speed? Other people. They will say what they always say, which is, I can't believe you didn't consult me. Especially if you're on a team. If you're on a team, the people around you will give you hell because they're going to feel like you've gone rogue, right? They're going to feel very disrespected. They're going to feel oftentimes betrayed because they want to feel like they have a voice, that they have a part of the decision. And you should give them a part in some decisions, but not all of them. Let them know that of course, when it comes to the major decisions, I want your opinion, right? I want your consultation. But when it comes to the minor decisions, we don't have time for that. As a leader, I have to make some decisions without the consultation of others. That's exactly what I told you the definition of a leader was. Somebody who makes decisions that affect the outcomes of other people. If we checked with every single person for and got their advice on every single decision, we would not effectively be a leader. What leaders need to be when they choose speed on the minor decisions, and they need to be decisive. That is critical to being a successful leader and therefore a successful decision maker. But they shouldn't always be decisive. Sometimes they need to be the opposite. And that points to the third trap, which is the accuracy trap. So it turns out that when we decide that something is a major decision, and we strive for accuracy, we sacrifice speed so we can get accuracy, we end up achieving not only not getting speed, but not getting accuracy as well. So about a year ago, I got a call from a business owner. And I didn't know who this business owner was. They said, they called me up and they said they were hiring an editor, okay, a video editor for a project they were working on. And their top candidate for editor had put me down as a reference. So now they're calling me to check in on the reference. Now, why, and the guy's name was Arnie, by the way, who's the video editor. Now, why Arnie had put me down as a reference to this day baffles me. I hated Arnie. He was terrible at his job. His work was shoddy, his communication was non-existent, and he was way over budget, way more than the budget we agreed upon. And so I felt bad at the time, but I felt obligated as a fellow business owner to tell this guy the truth. So I did, and he listened really patiently, and he waited for me to finish, and then he said thank you, and then he hung up the phone. So the next day, the next morning actually, I get an email from Arnie. So now I'm like freaking out because I'm looking at the email and I'm like, you ever like look at an email before you even open it, you just know it's gonna, it's gonna explode in your face. Like this guy, like I'm thinking to myself, all caps and middle finger emojis, like all around. And instead, when I open the email, I'm surprised that he's not angry with me, he's happy. He's like, I don't know what you told that guy, but he hired me an hour later. What the heck happened? It took me a couple days to realize it. That business owner never wanted my advice. What he wanted was my validation. So what's the deal with references anyway? I sound like Jerry Seinfeld. What's the deal with references? Why do we seek out references? There's actually a lot of meta-analyses that show that references actually don't lead to better hiring decisions. But it's pretty common sense, right? Like when we ask a job candidate for a reference, what are they going to do? Send us their worst critics? Oh, they're going to send us people that are going to give them a favorable evaluation of them. So why do we do it? we know why they do it. It's the same reason why every single person in this room, when they're about to make a decision, calls their friend or their family member because they want feedback or they want, advice. You don't want feedback. You don't want advice. You want them to tell you exactly what you want to hear, right? You're not looking to improve the accuracy of the decision. You're most of the time, not most of the time, but a lot of times, you're trying to feel better about the decision that you're already thinking about making. Psychologists call this mood repair, and that's what that business owner was doing. He knew he wanted to hire Arnie, and he expected me to tell him good things, and when he didn't, he had to hang up the phone because he realized there was this cognitive dissonance that goes on. So the problem with mood repair, this strategy of going to people for advice when you know they're going to tell you what you want to hear, is not only are you sacrificing speed, because you are, right? You are now engaging in a process that is slowing down the decision making, but now you're not even getting the accuracy. Because in order to make a more accurate decision, you do need to reach out to people, right? That is the gold standard for making a better decision, is reaching out to people. Consultation. But you need to be willing to seek out people who will disagree with you, who will tell you the truth, who will tell you what you don't want to hear. And in the face of that information, you have to be willing to change your mind. In a word, you have to be persuadable. Being persuadable is a genuine willingness to change your mind in the face of evidence, and our culture does not appreciate it. If you look at all of our politicians, all of our leaders, what we look for in leaders is decisiveness, right? We want the leader, we feel like what's strong is the leader who stays the course, right? Who stands in their convictions. But persuadable, I argue, in a world that's changing faster than ever, is the real competitive advantage. Shouldn't always be persuadable, but when you're interested in making a decision, an important decision, you have to be. So every single Friday for the last 3 years, I have met with a group of entrepreneurs, right? So 3 other entrepreneurs, and we meet virtually, and as a support group. Really, it's about holding each other accountable, right? Getting their feedback. See, these people, and they're my brothers, right? These people know me better than anybody in the world, including my girlfriend and my family. We know about our goals, we know about our challenges, we know about our fears, and their goal is to hold me accountable, right? We make 2 solemn commitments to each other, too. The first one is radical honesty. Every single one of us has lots of people in our lives that will tell us what we want to hear. That's not what this group is about. Our group is about telling the other people what they need to hear. And the second solemn commitment we make is about extreme persuadability, which means is that if people are going to have the courage, if members are going to have the courage to tell us, to tell other members, feedback or news that they don't want to hear, then we have got to be willing to change our mind. We don't always have to change our mind, right? Persuadable doesn't mean gullible, but we have to be willing to change our mind. So about 2 years ago, when I was in the middle of writing my book, it was hard. I was in the real thicket of book writing, and anybody who's written a book probably knows the experience. And one morning, I wake up with a revelation. I have this idea for a virtually different book, really unrelated concept. But it was just so compelling, I was like, I need to write this. So I started writing it, and I put the Persuadable on hold for a second. I started writing this other book. And for 3 weeks, I was obsessed, right? I was like Jerry Maguire writing his mission statement. I was obsessed. And this thing was good. I'm telling you, this was a good manuscript. By the end of 3 weeks, I thought that this book was going to change the world. I was pretty sure of it. And so I was pretty sure what my group was going to say, but I decided, this is a big decision, kind of changing the direction of this book, so I should probably run it back by my brothers. And so I did. They didn't meet it with as much enthusiasm as I thought. And it wasn't because it was a bad manuscript. It was, and I'll tell you exactly what they said. They said, Al, you're hiding. You're hiding. This is the resistance. You're in the hardest part of writing a book, and you're looking for an escape hatch. You're looking for the next shiny object, right? There's nothing wrong with this book that you're writing, but it's not the book. It's not the book that's your baby. It's not the book that you've been talking about forever now. It's not the book that we know has an idea that's going to impact lots of people. So you need to cut out the bullshit and you need to start writing persuadable again. Now, at first I was defensive. The next day, I was depressed. And on the third day, I had reached acceptance. They were absolutely right. I threw that 3-week manuscript in the trash. I've never looked back at it. And I started writing Persuadable again. It was hard, but I finished it. And I'm more proud of that book than anything I've ever done in my life. That turned out to be one of the defining moments in my career, one of the best decisions I've ever made. And it was only achieved because I had the ability to be persuadable in a group that was willing to tell me the truth. So let me ask you the fundamental question. Do you have people in your life that are willing to tell you the truth? Do you have people who are willing to tell you that you're hiding, that the resistance has you, that tell you when you're going off track? Or do you have a lot of yes men? Not only in your career at your organization, but in your life. That's the fundamental question here. So, to recap, decisions are hard. They're fraught with anxiety, right? And underlying them are two concerns, the concern for speed and the concern for accuracy. And those concerns live inside the trade-off, the speed-accuracy trade-off. And we should, when it comes to the big decisions in our life, we should slow down. We should sacrifice speed because it's too important to get it wrong. But when it comes to the minor decisions in our life, we should sacrifice accuracy. Let's get them over with so we can get back to the major stuff. Now there's one more lesson I have to teach you here as I close, and that is that even as you discriminate between the minor and the major, even as you are persuadable when it comes to the major and decisive when it comes to the minor, you're still not guaranteed to make the right decision. And unless you're careful, that will derail you. So, one of my best friends, Blake, is a professional poker player. And he taught me this lesson better than anyone. Because one day I'm playing a game of poker with him, which is a terrible idea, by the way. Never play poker with a professional poker player. And I'm losing badly, as you'd expect, and I see this really great hand. And I was like, okay, this is the hand. So I start to really go in. I put in a lot of my chips for that hand. I end up losing. For the next 2 minutes, I'm beating myself up. I'm criticizing myself. I'm like, man, what a terrible decision. And he says, no, it's not. That was the right decision. You had the cards, right? You had the odds. You had the probabilities. See, in poker, you can do everything right and still lose the hand. That's the way decisions are as well. As much as you try to improve a decision, you will never guarantee a positive outcome. But here's what the other thing he told me about the best poker players in the world, what separates the professionals from the amateurs. They don't care about the individual hand. They know that they can't guarantee it. But what they do know is that the law of large numbers tells them that over time, over 100, 1,000, 10,000 hands, that if they improve their chances just even a little bit of making every hand a winner, they end up winning in the long run. And that, my friends, is the key to being good at decisions, is to realize there really is no such thing as a good decision. There are only good decision makers. And if you can apply these principles, if you can apply these tools and play the long game, to not stress out over every single individual, to realize that as important as that decision is that you're thinking about right now, and it may be important, that over the course of your life, you're going to experience 100, maybe even 1,000 of those kinds of decisions. And it's that thinking, that long-term thinking, that is your salvation. That, my friends, is how we turn decision-making from a tragic flaw into a competitive advantage. Thank you.
Okay, so if you are still tuned in or just joining us, we are live on Facebook. I'm your host, Bryan Elliott. I am the creator and producer of a show called Behind the Brand. And we've just spent like the last 30, 40 minutes with best-selling author Al Pittampalli, who's written the book Persuadable. teaching us, taking us to school on how to make great decisions. We're now going to do a Q&A, and we're going to take, we have a live audience here. Let me kind of pan so you can kind of see this. You can see we've got about 100 people. We're at Bryan University here in the heart of South Orange County. Hi, everyone. And we're going to take their questions, and we're going to take your questions. And this has been a lot of fun. All right, let me take this over here, and then I'll bring this to you, Al. We'll take some questions.
Man, that's a scary looking thing.
Yeah, that's right. Keep hearting it up, liking, sharing. Make sure you share this broadcast. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Come on in here, Al.
Wow, this is cool.
Yeah, this is cool, right? So we have about 750 people on this broadcast, and so if you're on the East Coast, make sure you tell us where you're at. I read some other comments like Raleigh, North Carolina, Zimbabwe was on there, someone was in from India, someone was in from Chicago.
Man, I wish you guys could see this. But.
Yeah, it's super fun. And I've been kind of scanning the comments for some of the questions, but let's take some questions from the audience, and I'll repeat it for Facebook Live here, and we'll keep it going. So what questions do you have for Al from the audience? Yep, right here.
Is there a main theme of challenges that you're helping organizations resolve?
And I'm going to repeat it here for Facebook. So the question was asked, is your main focus on helping organizations change and evolve? Is that your question?
No, is there a main theme that challenges that organizations are facing that you're helping them resolve?
So what's basically the major stumbling block from preventing organizations from changing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer to that question is as diverse as organizations themselves.
And I want you to talk to Facebook as well.
Okay.
Give Facebook some love.
All right. Facebook is the other guy. So, but I would say that adapting to change, which sounds like a kind of cliche these days, but it's really true. I mean, we are living in a time of unprecedented change right now. I mean, you probably just see it in your own life. I mean, the rate of kind of change in terms of your jobs and the skills you need to learn and your industry, how many things are being disrupted. I mean, it is a challenge for organizations that a lot of them are kind of set up for stability, right? Especially Fortune 500 organizations. The whole business model behind Fortune 500 organizations is to stay the same, right? To build economies of scale and to do things a certain way, in an efficient way. So one of the things I really try to focus on is what is leadership, what has to change in leadership when we live in a time of unprecedented change. And my thesis is that we need to be more persuadable. We need to be willing to change our mind, because as the world changes, new evidence and new data will show up that shows that, we need to rethink the way we're doing this. We need to get out of this business, go into this business. We need to pivot. We need to change. And so that's one of the main areas of focus I work with organizations.
I have a follow-up question to that, which is, where does change come from, or where can change come from most efficiently? Like, should it come from the top? Should it come from the bottom? I guess what I'm thinking of right now are these kind of iconic leaders. We have Mark Zuckerberg, who is hosting us here on Facebook, or we have Jack Dorsey, who's trying to turn Twitter around. They just did this whole live thing where they're, broadcasting NFL games live. So, but where can this change start from and happen the most effectively? From the bottom, from the top, from the middle?
Well, it depends. And you'll notice, infuriatingly, I always say it depends, because it usually does. But I think that a lot of times the best change does come from the bottom. It comes from people in the field. And that presents a problem for a lot of organizations, a lot of teams, because the power structure usually flows the other way, right? It's usually the kind of the CEO or the decision maker that is kind of sending down orders, sending orders down. And so sometimes, for example, the best people to know where a company needs to go are the salespeople, the ones who are on the front lines, the ones who are dealing with the customers and know that, hey, the customers used to want this, but did you know that I just had this conversation with this customer and they're saying they need this instead? And so,
Well, it's easier said than done, right? Like, so the top is notorious for punishing the people at the bottom for speaking up. Like, right, you know, the people on the front lines know what's really up.
Right.
And if they speak up, they're, you know, either let go or they're punished or they're banished or there's a blacklist. So, you know, it's like this dog chasing his tail, right?
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think that there's a lot of organizations that are doing that right. I mean, I think that things are changing now. I think that smart leaders are realizing that that kind of authoritarian, top-down way of leading is kind of going the way of the dodo bird. And if they don't really adapt, and that's why I wrote a book, is to light the fire underneath a lot of leaders, then, you know, they're not going to be those leaders anymore.
So I'm just going to remind you, if you're tuning in, you're new here to Facebook Live, we're here with best-selling author Al Pittampalli. I am your host, Bryan Elliott. I produce a show called Behind the Brand, and really my pleasure to take over the Entrepreneur Magazine Facebook page. We're having a lot of fun. We're here in Southern California. We're with a great group. More questions from the crowd? Back there.
What was the concept behind the manuscript you threw away?
So the question was asked because Al mentioned earlier that he ditched an earlier manuscript after one of his good friends called him out and said, "That's not your best work," or, you know, "You can do better," or whatever the phrase was. She wants to know what was thrown away.
So I don't talk about that for superstitious reasons, because
come on, he's got to tell us what this is.
No, I can't.
This is ridiculous.
I have a list of ideas that are kind of in the drawer right now. At any time I could pick up on any one of those, but I'd love to tell you what it is, but I can't. It's superstition.
Okay. There's a question over here, and then we'll go here next.
Thank you. Back in the 80s, I made a film about speed and about human incapacity to keep up with the technological advances. And so I'm really curious about where we are now making decisions, and the idea of how AI and data flow will help us make decisions, because we're not capable of making all the decisions that we need to make and knowing all the information that we need to know. So I'm kind of wondering, where does that leave us as a human when we're trying to do this?
So the question being asked right now from the audience, you know, with artificial intelligence or technology speeding up things, Al talked about, you know, sometimes speed or lack thereof getting in the way of us making good decisions. How is that going to help or hurt us going forward?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about this kind of revolution, this big data, this AI revolution, is that it's providing so much information and so much data that could help us make better decisions, but it often doesn't. There's actually some really good studies out there, some of them that were done decades ago, like in the 70s or 80s, that showed that the more technology a company had that could mine and get more information, the worse their decision making ended up being. Because what they were doing is, you're supposed to look at the data and then make decisions based on the data. But what they were doing is they were making decisions, and they were just using data to back up those decisions that they were planning on making. And so I think one of the challenges for big data and these, you know, everybody's investing in more information, and I'm arguing that unless we have the right psychology, unless we have the persuadable mindset, and we're truly letting the data drive us and not the other way around, we're going to have a lot of problems. So I think that, you know, humans have these biases, and the confirmation bias is the perfect example. That's not going to change anytime soon. And as long as humans are really running the show when it comes to decision making and kind of managing these artificial intelligence and big data and stuff like that, we're going to have problems unless we find systems to kind of correct for those biases or compensate for those biases.
So, Al, would you pull out your phone and show everyone what kind of phone you use? Maybe because you're walking the talk here.
I think it's in my bag,
Okay.
but it's like an old school, like 15-year-old dumb phone is what it is. I'm kind of trying to go the other way when it comes to technology.
There's some good questions on Facebook, Bryan.
Yeah.
People are asking on the group.
Yes, I know. There are tons of great questions here. And please continue to ask your questions in the comment. I will make sure to answer them in the follow-up if we can't get to them live. But your questions are needed. Please keep asking. You can also tweet me at Bryan Elliott, or you can tweet Al at Pittampalli. There's a question here, and then let's go here next. Yeah.
Yeah, Al, thanks for the insightful topic. You mentioned getting distance when you're dealing with the categorization trap. And you mentioned that one of your daily disciplines is meeting with your assistant to get some of that distance, which, and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, sounded like a session, a decision-making session about your decisions, which kind of put me in sort of this infinite loop of decision quagmire. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Okay, so the question being asked is basically, how do you get distance? Al talked about, needing this distance or a different perspective when you're trying to make a big, stay with me? Yeah. Al talked about when you're making an important decision to get some distance. He talked about spending time with his, or maybe on the phone with his assistant to get perspective. How do you get distance is maybe your question, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, so what we're talking about here is the technical term is a meta decision, right? And it's a decision about a decision, which is very confusing, but trust me, it's worth it, because it turns out that one of the worst things that we do whenever we are facing a decision is just jump into the decision. It's a bad idea. Almost always it's a bad idea, because like we talked about, when you jump into a decision, you're now embroiled in the decision, and now you don't have the clarity and objectivity to understand whether it is an important decision or not an important decision, or what kind of timeline should I give myself for this decision. And so that's why it's so critical to take a step back, to get distance, to have a ritual where whatever decisions you're about to make, where you kind of really take a bird's eye view to figure out, well, why am I even making this decision to begin with? So one of the things that psychologists have now understood is there's two kind of different forms of thinking. There's why thinking and there's what thinking. So when we're engaged in activity, right, when we are doing something, writing is the perfect example. When you're writing, you're actually engaged in what thinking. Your mind is focused, your cognitive resources are focused on, okay, what am I doing? What do I need to write? It turns out there's another form of thinking, which is why thinking, which is, well, why am I even writing this to begin with, right? Does this sentence make sense? Does this period make sense? The best advice any writer will ever give you is do not write and do not edit at the same time, because those two kinds of thinking are incompatible with each other. When you're thinking about writing, you just don't have the cognitive space to think about the editing. Same thing goes with decision making. When you are making a decision, you're not good at evaluating the kind of objectives of the decision or the importance of the decision. So that's why you have to step out of the decision making in order to really evaluate what kind of decision you're making.
Love it. Right here?
So you mentioned whenever talking about categorization, the waterline principle, the example on how to evaluate whether something will basically sink the ship. But as an entrepreneur and with a staff, that whenever you're not just wanting to talk about decisions that will sink the ship, but how do you prioritize and categorize things that will actually further the organization? So,
Okay, the question being asked is, how do you make these decisions that won't sink the ship, or more importantly, how do you make these decisions that are going to propel it forward, yeah?
yeah, how do you prioritize? Because bright, shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, and how do you prioritize those decisions if you have bright, shiny object syndrome? How do you prioritize?
Okay, so the waterline principle, I would argue, is a kind of a negative framing for decision making, right? I mean, it's basically presuming that the important decisions are the ones that could sink the ship. Well, there's also important decisions that are the opposite, the opportunities, right? Like, wow, this new innovation or this new product or this new way of thinking could be a game changer, right? And that's a major, highly consequential decision as well. So for sure, you have to, when you think about that's why I use a more neutral term, which is major decision, because it could mean a really terrible threat or a really great opportunity. Both, probably deserve accuracy, time, maybe a meeting, consultation, weighing the options. Now, as for prioritization, that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, one of the things that my philosophy, this presentation, begs for is understanding values, right? When you think about organizations that have these kind of really bland, I'll just say stupid mission statements that mean nothing, you realize that what a wasted opportunity, right? Because the reason why mission statements are important is not just to have something on your website or just to be able to tell your employees something that you can check off the box. No, it's to help people prioritize. It's to be able to look at all the decisions that we have on our agenda and say, okay, well, let's measure this against our mission statement, the things that we know are important for the organization. Google's mission is to organize the world's knowledge, right? So they're in a meeting and they have all these different topics that they could discuss or all these different decisions. I would hope somebody says, okay, well, given that our mission is to organize the world's information, which one of these decisions is most important? Which one of these things should we be even talking about right now? So one of the challenges I think in organizations is, I will ask just a random person in the organization, like, what do you do, right? Like how does what you do contribute to the mission of the company? And it's amazing how often they can't answer that question. Because especially the larger companies, you're so removed from what the company is actually doing. How could you ever know how to prioritize decisions when you don't know what the value actually producing to the customers are? So this is an argument for sitting down with your teams, with your organizations, with your companies, and understanding, okay, what are we in the business of? What is our mission? What is our set of values? Because that's the only way you can really prioritize.
Okay, if you're just tuning in right now, I am your host, Bryan Elliott. I am the creator and producer of a show called Behind the Brand. And we're doing an Entrepreneur Magazine Facebook Live takeover. I'm here with best-selling author Al Pittampalli. We flew him in for one night only from New York City to Southern California. So thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to like this up, share it, tell us where you're from, and leave a question in the comments. And we'll try and do our best. We're here in front of a live studio audience, if you will, taking questions live. And so we're going to go to another question over here, Damien.
So it's a variation of what's being asked on Facebook. How do you recover from a bad decision that you made, especially in the leadership role?
So the question asked is, how do you recover after making a bad decision? Yeah?
That's a very good question. And I think that, when it comes to resilience, I think that there's two elements. One is just this kind of ego problem that we have just as individuals. And I hate to take this into like a more of a mindfulness direction, but I think that's what it is. I think that a lot of the angst when it comes to making a bad decision and recovering is really no more than just having, recovering your ego, right? Really getting to the, it's like the basketball player that misses the shot at the end of the game. And they're like, on the ground and they're like, hitting their heads and they're trying to show penance to their teammates. No, you don't need to, right? I mean, you missed a shot, which is totally fine. People do it every single day. It's the quicker you can move on, get back on the court and practice, the better you are. And yet we fall into this trap. Our ego is very kind of corrosive sometimes, and it forces us to think that we have to stay down longer than we actually do because we're putting on a show for other people. And as soon as you get that, I think that can be your salvation because you realize, you know what, I don't have to stay down. Now, some decisions really are catastrophic, right? They really are, Anthony Weiner comes to mind. But I think that the reality is, pouting about it doesn't help. And it's very hard. I mean, I do this all the time where you make a decision and it fails and, you want to move on, but you can't. But the sooner you can, and the sooner you realize that you're probably distorting in your mind the magnitude of the consequences, no matter how bad the downside is, it's probably not as bad as you think.
Yeah. Can I just jump in here with you? So,
Sure.
So the positive example that comes to mind is Elon Musk, right? It's like Elon seems to be making catastrophic mistakes every other week, right? A rocket explodes and blows up Mark's satellite, but then he has some success, and it's like he's gotten to the point where he's okay with making mistakes.
Right.
And some of the best advice I ever got from our mutual friend Seth Godin, he talks about failure, and we all say this phrase, like, failure is not an option. And he says that's completely false, right? Like, failure has to be an option in order to succeed. They go together. You cannot succeed without failure. And he says the person who fails the most ends up winning, because what goes along with that is, you make a mistake, you fail, but you come back to fight another day, right? The people who lose, who actually fail, the people who fall too far, right? Like they completely, they're either out of money, or it's they jump out of an airplane without a parachute and they can't survive it, or they just never try in the first place, right? And so they end up never being able to figure it out. And those of us who keep grinding, who keep trying, who keep failing and iterating, we eventually succeed because we keep, we figure it out.
Well said.
There's a question back here.
Coming from a nonprofit, perhaps, at least in some cases, in nonprofit perspective, decision-making can be kind of more collaborative. So my question has to do with, it sounds like you're talking a lot about individual decisions from person and business and making the mind lessons. What about, how does this interact with a group decision-making process?
Okay, the question being asked by the person in the back is coming from a nonprofit perspective, and he's asking, well, it's all well and good making these decisions on your own as an individual, but what if it's like a group think, or maybe decision by consensus or whatever? It's a group decision-making process.
Yeah, so group decision-making is fantastic, and the decision-making research shows us that on average, and not, there's definitely varying circumstances, but on average, groups tend to make better decisions than individuals, right? Because there's this great brain trust that occurs. People kind of compensate for other people's biases. Discussing things with other people kind of makes the best idea win. The only challenge is it's expensive, right? It takes a lot of time and energy. Like, I talk to a lot of organizations about meetings. Do people have any understanding of how expensive a meeting is? Like, stopping 10 people, right, from what they're currently doing, putting them in a room together, which is so 1995, by the way. I'm kidding, I love meetings, but what you're doing is, I call it meetings weapons of mass interruption, right? Because that's what you're doing, right? You're like, if it's a 10-person meeting, you're interrupting 10 people for an hour, if that's how long the meeting is, plus the switching costs, plus the preparation time and that kind of thing. And so I'm all for collaborative group decision making, especially in meetings, but this better be an important decision, right? If this is the decision on what color the stamps should be on the fundraising letters that we send out, don't invite me to this meeting, Let the group decisions occur for the important major decisions for our workplaces and even in our lives.
I think I'll just chime in one more thing too. So I think that maybe another caveat or it depends moment could also be, it depends on whether or not those group decisions are being made equally and the voices are being heard with equal weight. Another author friend of mine, Susan Cain, wrote this great book about introverts and extroverts. It's a book called Quiet, in a world that can't stop talking. And she makes the point, there's a lot of research that actually this brainstorming activity with group dynamics doesn't work because we end up listening to the voices that are the loudest, not necessarily the ones that have the best ideas. And so we just have to be cautious when we're making group decisions that we're listening to all the voices equally, giving them equal weight, especially people like me who are introverted, who don't really feel like speaking up.
You're introverted?
I'm super introverted, yeah. And the other thing Susan points out in her book is that President Obama is also a classic introvert, right? And so part of this being introverted is the ability to sort of turn it on, be the host of a show and, be great in front of the camera. But as soon as all the lights are off and you guys are gone, I'm like spent. Like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I just go into a dark room. I want to sit curled up with a book, and I'm recharging. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents on what Susan said about group dynamics. Another question over here?
I work with a lot of senior leadership for healthcare companies. They're rather traditional. How do you get them to become persuadable?
Okay, so the question is, she works with a lot of senior leadership who is very conservative, with air quotes, and so how do you get them to be persuadable? So I guess what you're saying is they're stuck in their ways, they're hard-headed, they're whatever, maybe they're puffed up, who knows, they've got egos, and they're not easily persuaded.
So this is a difficult question to answer. It's also the reason why I wrote a book, and I don't mean that to be self-promotional, it's the truth. I mean, it's like when you are embroiled in a kind of conflict with somebody, or you're just butting heads with somebody, trying to make them persuadable will never work, because they're going to know that you have an agenda, right? Because you do, right? You're not saying persuadable. The kind of like the mantra for persuadable is let the best idea prevail, right? That's what really persuadable means. Like you're with somebody and you say, you know what, my idea, your idea, let the best idea prevail. But when you try to make somebody else persuadable, often what you're saying is let my idea prevail, and that's why it often doesn't work. And so one of the things I tell people, which is frustrating because that's not what they want to hear, is being persuadable. Other people not being persuadable doesn't prevent you from being persuadable, right? Like just because your boss is stubborn doesn't mean that you have to be stubborn. Just because they don't accept your ideas doesn't mean that you don't have to, or you can't accept their ideas. The thesis of my book is not that just being persuadable is kind of this selfless, altruistic act. It's an advantage that if you want to make better decisions, if you want growth, if you want to adapt to change, if you want agility, being persuadable is an advantage. So one of the things I try to really get across to people is don't do it for the other person, do it for yourself. But yeah, if you're looking to make the other person persuadable, it's tough. It's tough. It's often a cultural thing, and you know that's why I work with organizations to try to change around culture. But it's by no means an easy, quick fix. Nothing that I can tell you right in this moment.
Okay, so I'm going to sign off here. It's getting late. I know you guys are on East Coast time or in a different country. I want to thank you. We're going to stick around for a little bit longer if you guys want to, and you can come up and ask Al questions individually. Does that sound okay? Everyone's going to give me a head nod. I want to thank the Facebook audience on Entrepreneur Magazine, and if you are just tuning in late, I'm Bryan Elliott, host of the show called Behind the Brand. You can catch this interview as well as one that Al and I did back in New York a couple months ago, and 400 other videos on entrepreneur.com, or you can watch it on my YouTube channel where everything's archived in full length and in little bite-sized pieces on YouTube/behindthebrand.tv. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like this, share this, and appreciate your support. Thanks so much. Here we go. Bye-bye, everybody.